We are getting ready to get into the basics of editing, which is chapter 7, and it deals with mostly with selecting objects in different ways. And I'll go over the basics real quick, and some of the things I've already covered. I guess I covered some of the things a little in advance, but that should make this chapter a little easier for you. Let's start out by looking at select object. You know what that is. That's your pick tool. Obviously you can click on something and it'll select it, but you can always, you can also, you have tools here to determine how to pick things. You can either pick things with a square fence or square rectangular object, a circular, a fence, which is like that, and it selects it. And this tool I've never been good at, but there's a way to like that. And this is a pretty good tool, which is your paintbrush selector, and basically it turns into a paintbrush a lot like what you have in Photoshop, and anything you touch with it will get selected. So you'll find this one's a pretty cool little tool. You can also select by name. It gives you all the name of the objects that I have in here, and you can just click on any one of them. Say the dome, and I call it a dome because, I mean, if I were building a house, I might, on a farm, I might cut that in half and call it a dome. But you can also choose whether or not you want your crossing. That's not a good tool to choose for that. This one is whether you want your crossing, things that intersect with your, to get chosen or not. You see, that's enabled. That's not enabled. Otherwise, if you have that enabled, it's everything that's inside of, and that I would suggest using. There's another way of handling this, and that would be to go into preferences. And since my drive is a little different, it doesn't work exactly right on my not my drive, but my graphics card. It doesn't work exactly like it's supposed to. But this is supposed to set it up much like your Windows, where your left to right crossing selects if it's not completely all inside, or your right to left crossing, which intersects, will select everything that it touches. That's enabling it, and this is choosing whether you want it to be right to left or left to right. Currently, mine works both ways, and if I cut this off, mine works both ways. So with that on, I just as soon deal with it here. But it's your choice, and you should experiment with that. Locking a selection. I have this selected. Here's selection lock tool. I need to select it. I can click outside of that and it's still selected. So that if I want to move it, it'll move. Keep in mind, if you move it this way, you're not constrained to any axis whatsoever. Well, what turns yellow is the ones that you are constrained. So this would be XY. This would be ZY. And I think this is just free. This is free rotating, as you can see in the top view. Again, this constrains you to Z and X. This constrains you to Y and Z. Okay, we've covered locking selections. I've covered how to constrain here to different axes. See, what turns yellow is what you're constrained to. We'll cover selection by name. We've briefly looked at that, and here again you can click here and it opens up that dialog so that you can actually choose the item that you want. The other benefit of that is that you can choose to turn it on or off to get it out of your way. You might want to do that, say, with your camera at some point. And the benefit of that is just so that you're not accidentally grabbing that when you mean to be grabbing something that's right next to it and moving it and ruining your whole setup. So there's the value there. Now you have selection filters, and you have them in a couple of places. You've got them here where you can turn things off and on. Say I want to turn my camera off. Well, there you go. And of course I showed you the other place that you can do it. Here's your selection filter, cameras, geometry. So if I set it to geometry and I try to pick that camera, it's not going to let me. And the same with any of these other objects. Of course, if I set it to all, I can grab anything. Selecting by color. Okay. If you'll notice, I have two items here that have the same. I have two items here that have the same color. This item and this item. Okay. If I click select by, color, and I select this, see it turns the cursor. If I select this, it's going to select everything that's got that same color. So there's an advantage to color coding your objects. Select one and it may select them all, and you may have a reason for doing that. And groups is another means of doing selecting. You can create groups, and the way to do that is go to group. No. Let's go ahead and select a couple of objects that we want to group, and we can name it. Let's call it silos. Okay. And when I select one, it selects them both as a group. And you can, of course, dissolve that group with either ungroup or explode, and that will allow you to do that. If I go here, you'll see that I've got the parent level and the two children of that parent group. That's not a hierarchy, that's just a group. If I go here to ungroup and then I go back there, you'll see that it's just the original two items. And you can select those independently now. This is best used for lighting. Say you have a chandelier. Hold your control key down. Hold your control key down and select each one. And then if you go to group, assemble, and of course you can name it, and we'll just name this light fixture. And that way, And if I select this, I've selected the parent level, so it will allow me to move them all together, which is important if you're trying to, say, adjust a group of lights so that, as you can see, it's illuminating the way it's supposed to, or the way you want it to. You want it over here. And again, this realistic view is going to give you a real-time view of what it's illuminating. You know, granted, when you put materials on it and things of that nature, that realistic view is limited. So you will have to use your rendering, your quick render up here, in order to get a more realistic view of the way it's going to render. Normally you grab there, and if you don't, then you want to constrain it to axes, then you choose which axes you want to constrain it to. And then squash. There you go. But I just grabbed one axis and squashed it. And you can squash it around any one of the axes. I'm going to undo and go back to the original shape. Play around with your scales, but just keep in mind this is for squashing, this is for selecting and uniform scaling, and this is for non-uniform scale. Okay, let's talk about the transform gizmos, which is what you're looking at right there. You're looking at a transform gizmo. Of course, it changes depending on what you're going to do to it, whether it's scale or move it or rotate it. You have a transform type in, which is transform type in right here. And as you can see, this coordinate system here is the absolute coordinate system. I don't see a value in using that because you've got it right here. Got it right there. It's sort of a duplicate. Now this is a pretty good tool. You can just offset it according to how far you want to move it along and constrain it amongst axes. And here again, you can constrain axes by using these tools here. Or, the other thing I think that's even better than that, and I would probably never use this, only because I've got the top view, the front view, and the left view. I can constrain everything along the axes in these views. In other words, on the left view, I can constrain it on the Z and the X-axis. See how that turns yellow? So and on the front view, this would actually be the Z-axis. But I can constrain it either in its upward or its X-axis. Or Y-axis, I think. I don't know. I think that this is set wrong. And then I can constrain from top view along the X and Y axis. You can actually do it here too. You just select it and move, and then grab the particular axis that you want to constrain it to. Let's go ahead and cover the different views that we have. The view setting here sets your transform gizmo to a hybrid. It's a mixture of both the world view, which is here, and the screen view, which what we're used to when we look in AutoCAD is this is being Y and this is being X. Horizontal is X, vertical in AutoCAD looking in plan view is Y. So it turns the orthographic view into more of the two. Hybrid is the view, is a hybrid system, and it's a combination of the world and the screen. And I'm going to basically just cover these three. I'm going to touch on this one, and the rest you can, I think it will be more confusing at this point than help. As you start digging into the program, then you'll start to get more accustomed to these. I pretty much leave everything on the view just because I get used to working in that. And I know what I'm looking at. If I start switching things, then all of a sudden it gets confusing, and I got to look back up here to make sure what I'm set on, and that just happened to me a little while ago. But you can see here that in view mode, this is the actual front view, and that would be the Z coordinate going up and the X coordinate going to the right. Well, the way this is, once you click on this and activate it, what it does is it switches to more like the screen mode, where up is Y and X is to the right and left, and Y is up and down. And that's more like the way you're used to looking at it in AutoCAD in screen view. Same here. Oop. Same with all the ortho views. It's going to give you the screen mode, view mode rather. And let's touch on screen mode, which is what we just mentioned. This is going to give you that Y and X coordinate. It's going to do it here too. It's going to even do it in the perspective user mode as well. So if you're looking at it as an axonometric or you're looking at it in perspective view, it's still going to give you the XY mode. I think that's confusing. I like to think of up as being up. But now world view gives you the real deal. It's going to match this in selection. I actually like this mode because it's the real thing. This matches this. It doesn't change from this to that. From the grid to the object. Same thing. Parent is creating a gizmo based on the parent assembly. And that right now is hard to visualize, but let me just brush over that real quick. When you start to set up something like an animation where a wrist is connected to a forearm and a forearm is connected to the upper arm, you know, if you make the upper arm the parent assembly, then all of the other gizmos will be based off of that parent part of the assembly. So where that may not mean much to you now, as you start to get into some more of the animation that is hierarchy based, then it will start to make more sense to you. And as I said, I'll briefly go over the others, but I think that, it gets more and more confusing. You may use it as you get more advanced, but we won't go that far in this class. I mean, local uses the coordinate system of the selected object. So if I select this object, that's just, to me, that gets confusing. I'd rather stick with these top views. Grid uses the coordinate system of the active grid. So the active grid right now is the home grid. Anyway, just familiarize yourself with some of these others. I think the top three are the ones that you're going to probably be using the most. The others get a little bit more repetitive. As you start getting into more animation, you may use in hierarchy, you may use gimbal. As we get into it, we may cover more of those details. Let's quickly look at another function that we have brushed recently, and that is using pivot features. And of course, one is the object center, the other is the center, and you can even see it's the center between two selected objects. The icon pretty much speaks for itself, and this one would be the center of really your 0, 0, 0 coordinate. And you can rotate and do any of these modifications or these transformations along those axes. It's going to bark at you if you don't have anything selected. And this panel right here, if you click right click and you click extras, it will give you this panel here so that you're not having to dig for array here. But you can access it both ways. Back to array. This array button right here exists here and here. And the way you get that toolbar, if you don't already have it, is right click here and go to extras, and it will give you that bar. And then you select your object, you click here, and it gives you a bunch of options. It gets a bit confusing at first to look at, but on page, in your book on page 140, and you might want to bookmark that, it really gives you a pretty good breakdown of what each one of these functions does, and I'll go through it quickly. For just strictly arraying it along an axis, you can choose which axis that you want to array something along and say, I want to do it along the x-axis. Okay. And I put my increments here. I'm going to put 10. And then how many I want, I'm going to just put 5. And then I click OK. And it gives me an array of objects along that x in the positive area. Now, I could have done this. I could have gone to here and put 5 and then put -10. Well, let's spread it out a little bit more and make it 50. And it goes along the negative axis, as you can see. All right. For your circular array, choose the object and click on array. Actually, make sure before you click on array, make sure that you have this use transform coordinate center. As you can see, that's where the gizmo is. Okay? And you go here, put in 50, let's go ahead and choose 7, and click OK, and that gives you an array around the center of the transform center. Now I could just have easily, drawn some other object and used another object to array that around. Spiral array goes like this. Select your object. We're going to maintain that. It's the same as the circular array. And we're going to maintain the center of the coordinate system as being the axis that we're going to rotate this around or revolve around. We're going to choose, that's the same setting. We'll maintain that same setting. And we'll go ahead and put a distance here of 10. Or no, let's go make that 50 as well. Okay. And if you'll see here, we've got a spiral array. So don't forget, when you go into here, it's selecting the actual distance that you want this to revolve around. And then that's selecting the distance along the Z axis that you want to move it up. So this is rotating and this is moving. That as we move along. But let's go ahead and select the object that we actually want to align with this. This would be considered the source object. Go ahead and select your line tool. You can see that the cursor turns into sort of that representation of that align tool with a cross on it. You want to select the target, and you can see immediately that it puts it dead center on that. Well, it's aligning the pivot points is what it's doing. You can see that here. What you'll then want to do is select center. And what that's doing is with the current object, which is this, it's got the pivot point, as you can see here, aligned with the center of this object right here. You can also constrain it along these different, that particular action against these modifiers. I click Z. What that all of a sudden does is that orients this towards the Z axis. And I think that's the effect that we're going for. So you go ahead and click apply. Okay. Now you can adjust this by, say, going to this modify panel. You can see the height is 8.756. You can then click on that and type 8.756, enter. And then you've got that cone centered to the, on the Z axis, to the actual object. And we made sure that the height of that, or the very bottom of that cone is sitting on top of the rectangle, cube. Now that, let's see, we have also that when you are going to modify things, these shapes, and hopefully you have spent some time looking through these to sort of play around with them and see what each one of them does. It's as easy as going into any one of them and select mirror, for instance, and you can create an offset. And a copy. And you can choose which coordinates you want it to mirror off of. You can see all the results here that I'm getting. Now maybe we want something like that. And that's all good. That shows you the end result. Toggling that gives you the end result. That concludes Chapter 7.